Hi everybody, thanks for joining us again. Welcome to an extra special video today. We're going a little bit behind the scenes on the exciting Crayta comic that we've recently announced. So I'm joined in lockdown from people all over the country. So we've got Gustaffo up in Edinburgh. Do you want to say hi, Gustaffo?
Hi, you right?
I've got Hannah, who's in the Midlands with me.
Hi.
And we've got Dan, who is down in Kent.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. So as you may have seen on some of our announcements earlier in the week, we're really excited to be bringing a comic to the Crayta universe. So we thought we'd get people together today and have a chat about how that came about and a little bit more about behind the scenes. So do you want to introduce yourselves first off then and tell everybody a little bit about your background and how you got involved in the project? Gustaffo?
Well, I'm a Peruvian artist. I've been living here since 2016. And basically, since 2016, I've been publishing my comics, and that got me into more projects and into the Crayta universe. So that's basically in a nutshell what I'm doing.
And Hannah, what about you?
I'm Hannah Waddlove, Operations Director here at Unit 2 Games. This is my first comic project. I'm usually a games person, but I get to do bit of both at the moment, which is really exciting and makes my geeky heart quite happy. So
and Dan, I hear you've dabbled with comics a little bit.
Yes, I have. I'm Dan Abnett. I am a comic book writer and a novelist, and sometimes also a game writer. I've written over the years for 2000 AD and Marvel and DC and just about everybody you can think of. And perhaps I'm most notorious for creating the modern version of the Guardians of the Galaxy, which has plagued the world ever since. So yes, I have some prior track record in comics.
You are familiar with the space. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Natalie Griffith. I'm the marketing director at Unit 2 Games. And also, like Hannah, my first comic book project. So this is super exciting. So first of all, come to you again, Hannah. The big question, we're a game-making game. Why are we making a comic?
So I guess there are a couple of reasons. First off, obviously comics are super cool and it's amazing to have got the chance to work on one. So grabbed it with both hands. But I guess the main reason in terms of kind of us as a company and you lot as players is that we want Crayta to feel like a game world. So something like Crayta has the potential to feel potentially like a dry platform where you as the player are entering a number of different games with no connection between them. So we've worked quite hard in terms of making it feel like a cohesive world where you're taking your character from one game to another. And the comic is an extension of that, basically. It tells the story, it tells the context, it gives you something to work with in terms of understanding why you are playing Crayta, why you're creating games in Crayta, and why you are kind of in this universe, basically.
And why did we choose Dan to work with? Put you on the spot in front of Dan.
Aside from his credentials, I am not regretting it whatsoever. Although we'll see how I feel by the end of this chat, I guess. So we've known Dan a long time. Unit 2 Games CEO Richard Smithies has been working with Dan on a number of projects for a decade or more, I guess, by now. Mm-hmm. So when we first kind of thought, actually, we want Crayta to feel like a cohesive game, we want it to have this kind of backstory to give players a context, we thought, well, who do we know who'd be really good at helping us tell that story in terms of working out what that story is and then providing it in the form that can be ingested by players. And Dan was pretty much our first choice, and lucky for us, he was available to do the work. So,
and so Dan, we've worked with you before a previous company, Radiant Worlds, on a last project that most of the team worked on, Sky Saga. But as we said, you and Richard go back longer than that. You've worked on games projects and creating kind of narrative and stuff within games, which is the main focus of Sky Saga. But how did you feel when we approached you about Crayta, that actually we were after your pure specialism of an accompanying comic? What were your first impressions of it?
Well, twofold. When I was invited in to be told about it and have it explained to me, I was incredibly impressed, because I think it's a really ingenious, innovative thing to do. And I was very impressed. And my second response was, why am I here? Because it is, as Hannah says, it is a game that has sort of no internal world as such. And in the game-related work that I've done over the years, this is a massive oversimplification, but there are sort of two types of players. There are the players who just play the game and don't need any kind of explanation for anything, and sort of aren't going to bother to stop and watch a cutscene or anything like that. They just want to get on with it. And there are the other players who become totally invested and immersed in the game and want to know every last detail of the world. And they want to understand everything and feel that there is a well-built world that is functioning around them. And the trick is, I think, always to try and find a happy medium where your game appeals to both of those equally and is appropriate. So it caters to the needs of both of those. Mm-hmm. So with this, Richard and Hannah were explaining to me that the essence is that we wanted to construct, as Hannah put it, a context around the game, which is there for the players who like the idea of an immersive world. And that, of course, led us to the idea of creating a sort of slightly futuristic SF techno thriller, in which Crayta, the game, appears as one of the components of the story. And by the time you've read it, it gives you an idea about why Crayta might exist and what it might be used for. And that was a really interesting challenge, because, as I say, game work is very different from comic work, and usually you're channeling one thing or another depending on what you're doing. And this one was a fairly odd approach, in as much as we were doing the world building via a comic in order to surround a game, which is quite an unusual way of doing it. And I think the other thing we really wanted to do right from the word go is, I mean, let's face it, what we're doing with the comic is promoting the game. There's no two ways about it. But we wanted to make sure the comic was sort of valid in its own right, that it wasn't mm-hmm. just a piece of marketing, or it wasn't just a sort of tie-in or whatever, that it was a properly worthwhile thing in its own right, so that in fact you could just read it as a comic and go, that was a good story, and that its connections to Crayta the game were very strong, but that it wasn't just simply being there in order to be subservient to it. Yeah. So we've really put a lot of effort and thought into making it sort of the best thing we can make it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess just to pick up on what Dan said, what we really wanted to do was make sure that to enjoy Crayta the game, you didn't need to read Crayta the comic, but also vice versa. To enjoy Crayta the comic, you didn't need to have that knowledge of Crayta the game. They kind of stand alone but support one another, and that was really important to us. I guess we looked at examples of where other games had done similar things. So I know Overwatch and TF2 are the obvious examples. As hero-based shooters, they've got really strong characters to lean into. Crayta, given the type of game it is, where you can create anything and be anyone, we don't have that, which meant that it was both an interesting challenge, because we needed to construct a whole world that supported Crayta the game without having those kind of characters that link the two, but also meant that Dan had a lot of freedom with where he created those characters and what they were.
So how did you go about scoping that out then, Dan? So we're kind of saying it's a thing that's connected to the game but not connected to it. It needs characters but there aren't characters. So where did you even start kind of pulling a story together?
The first thing I did was I went to my wardrobe. I got my best silk dressing gown and my cravat and my smoking jacket and my cigarette holder, so I could be the most snobby intellectual Sude and do this in a really postmodern way.
Excellent. And we have pictures of that, yeah?
Game. It's about the creators of the game, but it's not about the creators of the game. So yeah, really. No, it was... I basically decided that the thing to do was to think about why, in a fictional environment, people would be playing this game, and what would have brought that to the point where it is so important that it becomes the crux of the story. So we really thought about it in terms of, a science fiction thriller, quite dramatic, quite intelligent, with strong real characters. As you say, we could make those characters from whole cloth. They needed to be real, believable people. They weren't being borrowed from the game. So it really is a story about the people who, in effect, are creating Crayta and why they're doing it, and the issues that arise to that. And there was sort of, again, without wishing to either spoil the comic or sort of give away too much of what the game itself is, there was certain fundamental principles that we had to observe, so that we had to make sure the story led to a point where those things came together and made sense, which I believe we do, and tell an entertaining story in terms of getting there. And then once we'd done that, of course, we then had to build a world, and that's often the fun part. So I think we've come up with a world that is sort of surprisingly convincing. It sort of makes sense in a near future way, that it's very recognizable, but it's taken several steps beyond the world we live in today. So I think that works really, really well. And of course, then sharing that creative work with the artist, particularly with Gustaffo, and getting you to design and realize these things. If I've thought of this idea, how's that going to look? How do we balance old and new? How do we design the technology and that kind of stuff? And that's really quite exciting. So I suppose it's almost like speccing a movie. We've got a concept for a movie. How are we going to dress that and look it? I think it's come together extremely well in that regard. So a really unusual challenge, I have to say.
So that leads us neatly on to Gustaffo. So we're not writing a novel, we're writing a comic book. So obviously it needs to look fabulous as well as be a really compelling story. So you were the person that's kind of crafted the overall universe and kind of helped with that world building. And we'll talk some more about some of the artists and what they did in a minute. But do you want to take us through how you approached this process in the first place when Dan mentioned it to you?
Well, I entered on this last step, and basically was trying to gather all the information Hannah, Richard, and Dan would have, and try to, because sometimes it's not only I have to do a character, man, woman, ship, but to understand that universe. So in some moment it kind of makes sense. It should be like that, so you understand a character, or you understand how this is being built. And I just, after gathering all this information and having all the brief, I started developing the characters, and it was quite organic, because I would stand again and they would say, okay, that direction is really good, we could explore a bit more of this. So especially Dan and Hannah were making this process more richer, and it was just because usually the first step, which is character and building and prop design, it's very playful. So you try a lot of different things, and then you just adjust until it makes sense. But since the beginning, I think it was very, very organic, very comfortable. So it was a lot of fun. I think I got it. I understood it a lot since the beginning.
I think that's the way a collaborative effort really works. I mean, I'd met Gustaffo at a convention a few years ago, and really, really been impressed by his work for a start. And I thought, he'd be sort of great for this because of the particular qualities that he brings to comic strip work. But once we got going, as I say, we were coming up with ideas and then showing them to Gustaffo, and he was beginning to realize them. And then on the basis of what he realized, we could then take those ideas further and go, well, that's really working, so let's go further with that. And so it was a proper collaborative back and forth, which is the way I think the best things do. They sort of evolve to and fro to get the best end result.
That's interesting, because it's kind of really echoing the experience we're trying to create with Crayta, the game, as well. Yes. That the whole concept is this collaboration. So it kind of, it's all the way along. It's felt like a really natural extension of what we're doing. So in terms of the kind of the art style and the general look and feel, can you talk us through sort of some of the decisions you made on that front and the kind of look that you've gone for that overall world building?
Well, it was basically following what Dan explained me. It was the kind of it was, the thing is, in some moment you start drawing and things make sense, and you just follow. It's like you open one door and you see two other doors, and they just make sense. So basically your hands starts moving, and where it leads you. And we chat at least once or twice over the phone just to keep on rolling ideas. So it kind of sets you on where you want to go, and it just basically flow really.
Yeah, I think it felt like once we'd got those first characters, like Nuna and Jack were the first characters I think that we kind of worked on within the world. Once we got those set, the rest kind of fell out quite naturally. And sure, there were kind of small tweaks here and there, or you'd give us a few different options and we'd go, maybe a bit like number A, but maybe with number B's
Yeah.
letter B's, I's, or whatever. But yeah, I think once we'd kind of set that, once you'd got the starting blocks, it kind of all fell into place quite naturally.
I always think that's a very good sign on a comic, or indeed with anything. I mean, even when I'm writing a novel, if I find, and this is going to make me sounding completely insane, but forgive me, if I find the characters start talking for themselves, I realise I've got a good handle on the character, because I don't have to work out what they're going to say next, because they are acting in character. I think the same thing comes when the evolution of a project like this, when it becomes surprisingly easy and one thing rolls from one thing to the next, you kind of know that you're getting it right. It boosts your confidence to do that. I mean, some of the challenges here, we didn't want to present a world that was so artificially futuristic. We didn't want this sort of, fanciful, high-tech, everybody in silver spandex, flying rocket ships sort of future, because that just wasn't appropriate. So there was a sense of, nor did we want the kind of totalitarian, Skynet world controlled by robots type thing. We wanted to sort of avoid those cliches by sort of going in a slightly subtler direction. This is a world that we're portraying where essentially AI and ultra high tech has taken control of everything in a benevolent way. It basically has made life better for everybody. And I was thinking, well, if you think of, I was thinking about it actually in terms of my own house. I live in a house that I think is over now 200 years old. It's not a particularly special house, but it's an old house. So the walls and everything like that have been around for 200 years. The doors have, everything like that. But I've got broadband, and I've got all sorts of modern things built into that. So there's that sort of retroactive thing. So the world we wanted to present actually was very recognizable. Houses and everything like that, things that we have around today, because they wouldn't have just all disappeared, been replaced by sort of geodesic stones. That's not the way it works, except unless you're Logan's Run. So I wanted the idea that there was an organic creep, that this ultra high tech had simply just sort of woven itself in. And there are some very, very modern touches. I mean, some of the purpose-built headquarters and structures are very much modern. But the idea that it was just our world sort of refreshed and retooled and I guess repurposed for the modern life that we got. And that was something that Gustaffo is extraordinarily good at. And I've seen it in his other work, where he's got that blend of very old and very authentic and real, with touches of very modern. And that is exactly the feel that we wanted to get.
Cool. And as Hannah was saying, you were saying earlier about how we wanted it to feel, to kind of replicate that sense in the game, where you are taking your character and your creation into all of these separate games.
Yes.
That then led naturally on to actually having some different art styles and wanting to work with different artists. So can you talk to us about how that kind of process came about and how we approach people?
Sure. So obviously within Crayta, a lot of what we're trying to do is about inclusivity and diversity and accessibility of game creation. And we kind of wanted to bring that philosophy through to the comic as well. We wanted to tell the story from a number of different perspectives, of different characters and different scenes. And so we've worked with 5 different artists. Obviously Gustaffo is sort of the main one, doing the bulk of both the world building and the kind of sequential pages as well. But we worked with 4 other artists who each kind of did kind of guest slots, I guess. They've got 11 pages kind of scattered throughout the story to tell different perspectives. And we tried quite hard to make sure that obviously both the artwork and the artists are diverse. So we've got artists from around the world. And yeah, the juxtaposition of the artwork is, I love it. Especially, everyone's got their specific strengths. Obviously, Gustavo's work, the thing that I fell in love with in Gustavo's work was the expressivity of his characters. But we've got people like Mark Harrison, who does these amazing kind of sci-fi fight scenes. We've got a woman called Paulina Ganuccio, I think her surname's pronounced. I don't know how her surname's pronounced. That's awful of me, sorry. But her work is just incredibly vibrant, and just the way that all the art kind of fits next to each other in the pages, it brings out those strengths, I think, even further.
I think it does, and again, in the spirit of it sort of revealing a slight behind-the-scenes secret, because I think this is worthwhile, because it shows the way you can take something that was a necessity and then improvise and run with it. when we originally talked about doing a comic, and we decided we wanted to do 6 issues, 6 American-style 22-page issues, and the Unit 2 people who are very enthusiastic about comics, but perhaps, as you all say, not done one before, and they said to me, can we do this? And I went, yes. And I said, how quickly can we do this? And I said, when do you need it? And they said, well, kind of tomorrow. And I went, that doesn't work like that. So early on, when we were faced, and this is obviously pre-COVID, so we were working to a slightly different time frame, but we had, at the time we started, barely the amount of time it would normally take you to turn that around from scratch in terms of the schedules that, say, one of the American comic publishers would work on. So we knew it was actually completely unfeasible to ask one artist to try and produce it and then maintain that rate through 6 issues, because the wheels were going to come off somewhere, and we'd be, it would be horrible. So we deliberately decided the best way of doing it was to divide the art chores, so that we had several different artists, which allowed us a range of styles and a range of people and all sorts of different contributions. Whereas, as Hannah says, Gustaffo is the principal artist doing the bulk of the work and also the heavy lifting in terms of the world building. But that I would structure the story so that we were able to feature these guest spots of other artists. And originally, it was for the very prosaic reason that we wouldn't actually produce a comic otherwise, that we would have to share the workload in order to produce something. And I was trying to think of ingenious ways of making that those changes in art style work in the context of the story. It wasn't just like, oh, the next 11 pages will be drawn by somebody else, because nobody likes that. That's not how a comic should work. We've ended up with slightly more elbow room time-wise because of, I don't know, pandemics. Which is great, because it's given us time to polish things slightly. And one of the things that's happened, we weren't then immediately going to turn around and say to these other people, well, we don't want to use you after all because Gustaffo can do it all because he's now got time. So the way we dovetail the things together, I think, has really enhanced the story, because as Hannah's saying, Mark Harrison, to use him as an example, famous from 2000 AD work, incredibly sort of finished, polished, almost painterly style that he achieves with his computer artwork, was perfect with the sort of high-tech moments, the sort of almost virtual world high-tech in-game moments. And Paulina also mentioned there, with his vivid nature, it was like that was a different kind of virtual reality. It had a sort of synthetic color reality that was very different, again, from Gustaffo and from Mark and from Emma, and from Valentina, who are the other people who were doing the different pages. So we deliberately deployed them on different threads so that the change in art style actually expressed a change in setting or scene or moment in the thing, so that different characters were rendered in different ways. And having got that bold with it and going, this really works, there is actually now this wonderful organic reason why the art style changes. We then went to a preposterous level, but this was the sort of ingenuity, the sort of spontaneous thing that we thought this would be really good. So there are moments in the story, we've kept them few because they're quite difficult to pull off, but there are moments in the story where the art style changes mid-page. So, for instance, you will get 3 or 4 panels of Mark Harrison drawing something in virtual reality. Then the character will step out of virtual reality and Gustaffo will do the last panel on a page. And we actually symbolize the transfer between one type of reality to another by shifting art style midpoint, rather than on a page turn. That's unusual. It has been done before, but it was an unusual thing, and it was the sort of thing that we ended up realizing was a complete gift that we'd unexpectedly got for ourselves by overcoming what originally was just simply a logistical problem. So we've used that, and I think it's tremendously effective. I think when you read it it really sort of binds these different stories together. The story is big. It's set all over the world. It's diverse, and it's sort of in different realms. There's different places on Earth. There's different places in virtual reality. There's even one place that's not on Earth at all. And those things are represented visually. Before you've even read the words, they have a visual flavour each of their own. I think that's been something that we weren't really expecting to be as effective as it was, and is now a terrific asset.
And Gustaffo, how did you go about kind of knitting all that together? Because, as Dan said, not only are you doing kind of the main sort of world kind of building of it all, but you're also trying to create the flow of the pages and make that work. That must have been quite an unusual challenge.
Yeah, but I completely agree with what Dan was saying. It was because you have these other artists and how you mix them, and Dan has done a script that is so clever that makes all the sense in the world. And so it basically makes it even better. And the other thing is, the sequences made it was very clear. So you can see that the 5 artists that we are, that each one is very different from each other. So we were not trying to blend in one style. No. This is very colorful. This is a bit more realistic. This is a bit more cartoony, and try to take advantage of that situation. So, and for me, it was different, but it was a lot of fun just to see. Okay, I'm just going to do that last panel and how it's going to work out in the end. And in the end, it was like, okay, it's like a really hard change thing, which is the impact. I think it's better that if I have done the whole page myself. So it was a very interesting project, and to see also how people might interpret your character designs or the props that I've made. So it's been challenging, but a lot of fun. Really.
Cool. And Hannah, what are your biggest hopes in terms of how Crayta fans will react to the comic?
Well, most of all, I guess I hope they'll like it. I think they will. I love it.
Fair enough.
But I really also hope that they kind of delve into it a bit more. I hope that there's an enthusiasm for trying to work out a bit more of the backstory than is necessarily told through this series. I think that's probably, aside from hoping they like it, my biggest hope.
And Dan, how do you think sort of traditional comic book fans will react to it?
I really, again, I hope they like it. I think it's got a degree of sort of finish and quality that will be, is as good as any professionally produced comic should be. And therefore it's got a lot of things about it that will appeal to a reader who likes comics. I think the world is sort of inviting. One of the things we've done in the course of the comic, it's obviously it is 22 pages of strip. We've also dropped in beautifully designed text pages mid-flow that it kind of flesh out some of the backstory of the world building, and they're sort of an organic part of the story. So the story reaches a certain point, something gets mentioned, and then it's almost like you get the Wikipedia entry explaining what that is. So it sort of tells a bit more of the story, but it also just fleshes it out. So that sort of inadvertent thing, I think,
a bit like the guide in Hitchhikers that just
yes, actually very much like that, and that is I think that's tremendously effective, and I think obviously what we're constructing really in the 6 issues is something that is ultimately open-ended in as much as it reaches a conclusion, but the one of those part of that conclusion is now play the game. It sort of it opens it up like that, but I think it establishes a world that is rife for exploring. I'm hoping for a start that we can come back and explore it some more, because I think it's potentially incredibly interesting. But also, I think it's right for exploring for both readers and for the game players, that they can, in the same way that they explore Crayta the game and build things and that. I think I'm really interested in the kind of imaginative response of players and readers, what they come back to in terms of the things that they've written or designed or invented or thought of, or the questions they have about how these things work. And I know that actually that's one regard in which gamers are sort of more vocal than comic readers. Comic readers will read a comic and go, I like that, or I didn't like that. And maybe then they'll draw things about it that they liked. But actually, gamers will often construct and build and supplement, that they'll almost start adding those Wikipedia entries for themselves. I'm really interested to see what kind of thought processes that provokes. And it'll be... Actually, this sounds like a weird challenge, but I'm sort of weirdly interested to see if anybody catches us out and goes, "Oh, you didn't think of that," or supplies some kind of piece of lore that we just didn't particularly go into because it wasn't specifically necessary, and then says, "Well, quite clearly, these things must work like this. Then, if you've said this works like that," and that's the sort of, I guess it's in the same way that we've worked together in a kind of creative, brainstormy way to get this there. It invites more brainstorming, and it invites external brainstorming from the readership, from the players, from everybody outside to come back in and go, that's really cool, I've got an idea for that. I think that's brilliant. That's the very nature of Crayta the game itself, so why shouldn't it be for its sort of surrounding context?
Yeah, exactly. I think to use that as a jumping off point, a thing that would be really cool is if a way in which players and readers express that kind of curiosity and exploration of the world that we've built they can make it in Crayta. Like that's
Yeah.
what they can do. They can create games in Crayta that reflect either elements of the story or kind of essentially fan fiction, but in a game form. And I think there's a lot of really cool kind of crossover stuff that could happen there, and I'm really excited to see what people do with that.
Yeah, I think we're going to be actively encouraging people to do that, because that is, that's the beauty of it. This is what Crayta means to us, but we'd love to know what Crayta means to all of you, and kind of seeing what you do jumping off from this, and kind of remixing the ideas or making some stuff yourself in Crayta. It's going to be really exciting. So one final question for you all. Gustaffo, what's the thing you're most proud of with the finished comic?
Thinking of what Hannah said, she likes the expression of my character design. So I think I capture the characters that you feel that they're not just moving and doing a show, but actually you feel like that's a real person with their own world and working on and doing things in this universe that they have created. So I think that I'm pretty curious about the same thing Dan was saying, what people are going to explore and mention about this. So what people are going to, I don't know, try to say about those characters and how real or not they feel about it. So I think that's the main thing.
Fair enough. Dad, what about you?
Goodness me. Can I say two things? Two things. One thing is I'm really impressed that we come up with a story, and I'm not just crediting myself with this because it's a team effort. It's as much about how the characters look. But we come up with a story where I think the main characters are very strong and compelling, but they're quite unusual. They're sort of the unusual types of characters to hang a big story on, either a big sci-fi story or a big comic or something like that. And I like their realness. And that's a great credit, I think, to what Gustafo's done. I believe these people, and I think they're completely valid, strong characters to run a story with. And the other thing I think that I'm proud of, and I think we're all quite proud of, is that we've done something where it is we've sort of made sense of something that could be very, very complicated, and as a result, we've got something that is sort of has its own integrity as a story that stands alone, is not contradictory, does not depend upon something else to be understood. And exists, but is complementary to Crayta the game, and that's actually quite difficult. I think a lot of things that are technically speaking tie-ins, and I've worked on an awful lot of tie-ins over the years, is that you need to understand what the source material is before you can understand the tie-in. And without the source material, the tie-in is sort of a little bit empty or a little bit inexplicable at the very least. But with this, I think you could simply read the comic and go, "That was great. I got that. That was fantastic." Without it being dependent on something else. And its dependency is obviously part of its additional strength.
And Hannah, what about you? What are you most proud of in the end?
So I feel like I've got a bit lucky here because you asked me last, so I've had thinking time. So I think primarily the diversity. So as I said earlier, that's one of our kind of founding principles, I guess, with Crayta the game, is the diversity and about giving opportunity for diverse voices to express themselves through game creation, and I just love how we've managed to work together with a number of different artists and creating a world that has a massively diverse cast. Really, the characters are from all around the world, they're all different genders, they're all different origins and ethnicities, and I'm really proud of the fact that we've created something with such a diverse cast and such a diverse group of artists and writers as well.
Fantastic. Well, that's a fabulous note to end on. So yeah, issue 1 of our 6-issue run will be available shortly after we launch this summer. So the more dates will be coming soon. But you can start to get some teasers of the artwork on our newly launched Instagram feed. So head over there, Crayta Game on Instagram, and take a look and start speculating about what those characters are going to do and how they're going to play the story out. And in the meantime, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notifications for more upcoming news the game. You can join us on Twitter and Reddit, and join our Discord as well. So we'll probably start a comic discussion channel on Discord. So if anybody wants to jump in there and start talking about speculating about the story and telling us what you're most looking forward to, that would be great. So big thank you again, Gustaffo, Hannah, Dan, for joining us. And we hope you all looking forward to the comic and you enjoy it when it finally comes out. Thanks very much.